So, at long last, the return of Conor McGregor, or as I like to call him, Coomer McGooner, is now upon us. And when he does return, it will have been exactly 5 years and 1 day since he last fought, where he broke his leg in the trilogy fight with Dustin Poirier. And while it's still uncertain if Conor McGregor is actually going to make it to the fight or not, based upon things like his interview with Ariel Helwani, his posting on social media, and just the overall vibe leading up to this fight, I think we can expect Conor McGregor to actually make it into the octagon. However, making weight and getting into the cage is just the first step. And going into this fight, I think the big question that everybody is asking is, how washed is Conor McGregor? Because, as everybody is thinking, that is likely going to determine the outcome of this fight. But anyways, without further ado, let's get into the full card predictions for UFC 329. So, starting with the first fight on this card, let's talk about Cody Durden versus Alessandro Costa. And now with this fight, I will be going with Alessandro Costa, and I will be picking him by KO. Now granted, Alessandro Costa, he is taking this fight on short notice, but Cody Durden, right up until his last fight where he got a decision victory over Jafal Filho, which was quite impressive actually, considering how Jafal Filho, he's a pretty good submission specialist, and Cody Durden just wrestled his way through that. But prior to that short notice win up a division against Jafal Filho, who's not too high up there in terms of the unranked portion of the UFC flyweight division, Cody Durden was on a 4-fight losing streak, and he was basically on the verge of getting cut. And while I like Cody Durden because, you know, he is Kyoji Horiguchi's main training partner, and they corner each other in fights, but in this fight, I have to pick Alessandro Costa because of how much bigger of a threat Costa is on the feet. Costa is short, stocky, and powerful, and he's currently on a 2-fight KO win streak at flyweight, which is somewhat impressive. Granted, one of those KOs doesn't count because it's over Matt Schnell. But as for how I think this fight is going to play out, I believe that Alessandro Costa, he is going to be able to stuff all of Cody Durden's takedowns and just KO him on the feet. So yes, give me Alessandro Costa by round 2 TKO or KO, probably with something like a left hook. Now, moving on to the next fight on the prelims, let's talk about Ryan Gandra versus Zach Reese. And now with this fight, I will be picking Ryan Gandra, but I'll be picking him to win by a close decision, probably a split decision. And the reason why is simple. Ryan Gandra hasn't fought anybody good. His only win in the UFC is against Jose Medina, who is probably the worst UFC fighter to have ever been signed. Like, genuinely. Jose Medina is a guy who lost in Contender Series and lost 4 times in the UFC, including a loss to Zachary Reese by unanimous decision. And, fun fact, that's the only time when Jose Medina was not finished in the UFC. Every single other loss that Jose Medina had in the UFC was by finish. He got KO'd by Atuba Gutierrez in the first round, he got submitted by Dusko Todorovic in the first round, and then Ryan Gandra knocked him out in under a minute. And Zachary Reese took this guy to a decision. He took Jose Medina to a decision. I'm sorry, but that's just frankly kind of sad. And well, another thing with Zachary Reese is that he took Michel Pereira to a split decision. And now granted, I thought that Zachary Reese won that fight against Michel. But Michel Pereira, while he was on that crazy first round finishing streak up until the fight with Anthony Hernandez, I genuinely think that that fight with Fluffy just completely broke Pereira. It completely broke Michel Pereira, and he's frankly never looked the same since. Seriously, go and watch his most recent fight with Shahar Magomedov. It was terrible. And Zachary Reese was basically 50-50 with that guy. However, I still cannot pick Ryan Gandra by finish, simply because I do not know what he looks like against semi-competent competition. So yes, I will be picking Ryan Gandra to win this fight by decision, and by split decision in fact. Now, moving on to another fight up the card, we have Damian Pinas, Mr. Pinas here, versus César Almeida. And while I am picking Pinas here, this is a much trickier fight for Pinas than you might expect. While César Almeida is 38 years old, and he has to be declining at this point athletically, he is still a very, very competent technical striker. And the best example I can think of when it comes to this is how César Almeida perfectly timed a left hook counter while he was hurt against Abdulrazak Alhassan, and just flatlined Alhassan out cold. If Damian Pinas just goes in there and just swings wildly and trades with César Almeida, Almeida will be able to KO him. However, here's the thing with César Almeida. He is absolutely zero, and I mean zero takedown defense. This guy, he was getting taken down and controlled by Roman Kopylov, who is not only a striker, but also a rather small middleweight. But he also got taken down and wet-blanketed by Cezary Oleksiejczuk in his last fight as well. And now, while everybody does think of Damian Pinas as a knockout puncher, and as sort of like one of those, explosive YNs, as MMA Guru might say, Damian Pinas does train out of Nova União, which is, a Brazilian jiu-jitsu gym at heart, right? It was founded as a BJJ gym. So I would have to assume that he's been training grappling since he started his MMA career. If Pinas fights smart and mixes in even just a single takedown here, he should win this fight. And while you can never, ever, ever count on a fighter to fight smart, I just see there being more paths to victory for Damian Pinas here. If the fight takes place completely on the feet, then there's basically a sort of equal chance that César Almeida gets the KO or Damian Pinas gets the KO. It really is César's timing and experience versus Damian Pinas's, throbbing explosivity. But if the fight goes to the ground, then I could also see a hard pounding from Pinas here. Like, just tremendous amounts of ground and pound from Pinas. Lots and lots and lots, over and over. Him just thrusting his fist over and over and over again into César Almeida's face. So, as a consequence, my prediction for this fight is going to be Pinas by ground and pound TKO in the first round. And now, moving on next to another fight up the card that must have been booked right after Damian Pinas's as some sort of joke between Mick Maynard and Sean Shelby, we have Tracy Cortez versus Wang Cong. And well, according to Tapology, the betting odds for this fight have Wang Cong as a minus 130 favorite. That's very, very slim. I think that Wang Cong is going to absolutely destroy Tracy Cortez. While Wang hasn't been the absolute monster that everybody thought she was when she first came to the UFC because she beat Valentina all the way back in the day in kickboxing, however, with Wang Cong, her striking is pretty darn good for a WMMA fighter. Pound for pound, she doesn't have the power of somebody like an Amanda Nunes or a prime Jessica Andrade, but you can tell that there is some sting to her shots. And the last time that Tracy Cortez fought a striker with comparably good mechanics and technique, she got pieced up by Rose Namajunas. So yes, give me Wang by decision. And now, moving on to another fight up the card, we have Kai Kamaka III, or Kai Kamaka III, versus Luke Riley. And now, I'm going to be a little bit controversial here, but I will be picking Kai Kamaka as the huge or moderate-sized underdog here. And I have a couple reasons as to why that's the case. So Luke Riley, he's currently 2-0 in the UFC, and his wins are over Bogdan Grad and Michael Aswell Jr. And the funny thing about Bogdan Grad and Michael Aswell Jr. is both of them only have one win in the UFC, and that one win is over the same guy, Lucas Alexander. And here's the thing with Lucas Alexander. Lucas Alexander was just not very good. He was, honestly speaking, he was not UFC level. And the thing is, Luke Riley, despite being an undefeated prospect, he struggled in that first round against Bogdan Grad. In the Bogdan Grad fight, Luke Riley got taken down and controlled for the vast majority of that round, and Bogdan Grad won that round as a result. And then, in the Michael Aswell Jr. fight as well, that fight was very close on the feet. Like, Luke Riley clearly won, but he was still getting pushed up against the fence and controlled at points, and in the third round, he got taken down and controlled there as well. Luke Riley has very good striking, but his takedown defense is just not there. And that leads me to Kai Kamaka's skill set. And now, for those of you who don't know who Kamaka is basically the living personification of Extreme Couture as a gym. If Extreme Couture were a person, it would be Kamaka III. It really is a competition between Kamaka, Chris Curtis, and Dan Ige for most Extreme Couture fighter on the roster. And based upon that information, what can you expect out of Extreme Couture fighters? Well, it's mainly forward pressure, lowish output, but defensively responsible boxing, and of course a lot of work against the fence, and the occasional crafty takedown. The Extreme Couture style really is the perfect style to fraud check a young and undefeated prospect by crafty 29-28 decision. And if you look at Kamaka's wins, well, the vast majority of them are by decision. And well, that leads me to how I believe this fight is going to play out. I believe that Luke Riley is going to very clearly win round 1. He might even knock Kamaka down in the first round, similar to what happened in Kamaka's last fight against Dakota Hope. But then I believe that in rounds 2 and 3, Kamaka is going to very slightly edge Luke Riley out. I expect that Kamaka is going to be pushing Luke Riley up to the fence using his forward pressure and his cage cutting, because the one good thing that every Extreme Couture fighter seems to be able to do is cut the cage, because they seem to work on that quite a bit over there. So I think Kamaka is going to get Luke Riley up against the fence, and then from there, he's going to do things like jab, jab, 2, jab, left hook, very simple, very everyday boxing combinations, like the most simple, basic stuff that they can teach you. And then he's also going to clinch Luke Riley up against the fence and knee him repeatedly in the thigh and in the body. And he's going to score points like that. I don't believe that this fight is going to be all too eventful, but I think it's going to result in a close but clear win for Kamaka based upon what happens in rounds 2 and 3. So yes, my prediction for this fight is Kamaka by 29-28 unanimous decision. Now, moving on to another fight up the card, we have Cody Garbrandt versus Adrian Yanez. And while I do want Cody Garbrandt to win here, because frankly I think that the winner of this fight should be the one who fights Kai Asakura next, but I have to pick Adrian Yanez. When it comes down to it, both of these guys are basically pure boxers. And if you look at their boxing, Adrian Yanez's boxing is more technical and more diverse than Cody Garbrandt's, especially at this point in Cody's career. If you go back and watch Cody Garbrandt's last fight, you would know that the only reason why he won that fight was because he got low-blowed twice and ended up throwing up, and his opponent ended up getting 2 points taken. If that did not happen, Cody Garbrandt would have clearly lost that fight, and his opponent, Long Zhao, is not very good. Like, Long Zhao, I'm going to be honest, he's not truly UFC level. He's probably somebody who should be on like the upper echelons of the regional scene, if that makes sense. And then in contrast, Adrian Yanez, while he did go to a draw against Ricky Simón, he nearly finished Ricky, and frankly, that fight should have been a clear win for Adrian Yanez. And if Adrian Yanez lands the same shots that he landed on Ricky Simón on Cody Garbrandt, he is going out. When it comes to the boxing of these two guys, Cody Garbrandt's boxing, if it can be called truly boxing, a lot of it consists of sort of feinting at range, staying out of range, and then blitzing in, or like shuffling in, and then throwing a right hand, or throwing a left hook. And it's very, very reliant on his movement. And, well, he's 35 years old, and, of course, his movement and his reactions, it's going to be slower, right? In contrast, Adrian Yanez, while he does end up struggling against the bigger bantamweights, because, frankly, Adrian Yanez, he's flyweight sized. Okay, he's like 5'7", and he's got very little muscle on his frame. Adrian Yanez, he's not that big, so he ends up struggling against the bigger bantamweights, but he's got a decent jab, and he uses it. And he uses that combination to set up combinations pretty fluidly. As for my prediction for this fight, I believe that Adrian Yanez will find Cody Garbrandt with his jab and then KO him. I believe it will happen in the second round. However, if that doesn't happen, I can also see Adrian Yanez winning this fight through a very clear decision, similar to what happened to Cody Garbrandt in his fight with Rob Font. Cody Garbrandt nowadays is simply just too low volume, and he stays out of range too much to be that much of a KO threat against Adrian Yanez. So, unless he lands like some sort of big, lucky swinging punch, I don't see Adrian Yanez losing here. Granted, Adrian Yanez, he has been outboxed and knocked out before by Rob Font. But even in that fight, Rob Font basically beat Adrian Yanez at his own game, where he set him up with his jab and then KO'd him. Cody Garbrandt really doesn't do that nowadays. The vast majority of his game, if it can even be called a game at this point, just consists of him shuffling around at range and then leaping in to throw one big shot, and if that doesn't work, he just goes back to shuffling around at range again. So yes, give me Adrian Yanez by round 2 KO or TKO, and if not that, then Adrian Yanez by a very clear and comfortable volume-based decision. Now, moving on to another fight on the prelims, we have Gable Steveson versus Elisha Ellison. And well, here I will be picking Gable Steveson to win, but I will be expecting him to win by a very, very sloppy and very underwhelming way. Gable Steveson is obviously going to be the far superior wrestler and the far superior athlete, but he is still only 3-0 in MMA. If you go back and watch his fight with Hugo Lazama, you would see that his reaction to strikes, and especially kicks, just aren't there yet. What I expect to happen in this fight is Gable Steveson trying to stand with Elisha Ellison for probably like the first minute, and then as soon as Elisha touches him with a low kick or a jab, Gable's going to shoot, and Gable is going to get the takedown, but Elisha is going to end up getting up using the fence, because that's probably going to be the one thing he's been training throughout this entire camp. Just pure wrestling defense. Of course, using the fence, because if you're going to be facing an Olympic gold medalist in freestyle wrestling, the best way to defend takedowns from somebody like him, and the best way to get up from takedowns from somebody like Gable Steveson, who has elite wrestling, is going to be to use something that's unique to MMA wrestling, which of course is the fence. I believe that in the first half of the first round, or maybe even the second half of the first round, Elisha Ellison is going to put up a decent fight. Not a true fight, but he's going to be able to defend somewhat decently against Gable Stevenson's wrestling onslaught. But then, in the second half of the first round, or maybe even in the first half of the second round, what we're going to end up seeing is Gable Stevenson's cardio and his just sheer athleticism, allowing him to overwhelm Elisha Ellison and finish him by ground and pound TKO. Gable Stevenson's win is going to come as much as a result of the physicality advantage he's going to have as the wrestling advantage here. At least that's my prediction. And well, I believe that this fight is going to make everybody sort of remember the performance that Bo Nickel had against Cody Brundage, where everybody ends up saying, hey, he got the finish, but it should have been much cleaner and much easier for him to do. So yes, my prediction for this fight is going to be Steveson by late round 1 ground and pound TKO. And now, moving on to the featured prelim, we have Bobby Knuckles versus Nikita Krylov. And in this fight, I will be picking Bobby Knuckles via lighter man skill. While Whittaker is very clearly out of his prime, he is still much faster than the vast majority of light heavyweights, and he's much faster than Nikita Krylov. And while Robert Whittaker is going to be at a noticeable height and reach disadvantage here, I believe that his control of distance, using that karate boxer style that he has, is going to let him win this fight against Krylov pretty clearly by decision. Krylov is a bit of a plodster, and he's not a young man himself. And while he does have KO power, so there is a chance that he catches Robert Whittaker bouncing in. What I believe is going to happen is Whittaker is just going to dance circles around him and just pick him apart at range using his jab. Because Robert Whittaker, he doesn't have the best jab in MMA, but it is quite underrated, I think. Whittaker tends to keep his hands low, so he's able to pop that jab out from a low angle, and he's shown in the past against Paulo Costa that against an opponent that plods after him, he's able to pop the jab and then slightly circle out, pop the jab, circle out, and just do that for 15 minutes. And then in the Ikram Aliskerov fight, he showed that he's able to use the jab to set up bigger power shots, right? Like, he used the jab to find out that Ikram Aliskerov was always going to counter using the left high kick, and then he, feinted the jab and then timed the right overhand to wobble and then eventually finish Ikram, who is now going on to perform pretty decently in the middleweight division, right? And then with Nikita Krylov, well, he just beat Modestas Bukauskas, but frankly, Modestas Bukauskas, I'm sorry, but he's always going to be a guy who is never ranked material. He's just never going to make it to that point. Like, his potential, he's already at the upper limits of his potential as a fighter. And then prior to that win over Modestas Bukauskas, Nikita Krylov, he got knocked out by Bogdan Guskov, who was all right, but he also got knocked out by Dominic Reyes. And while Dominic Reyes, he is a southpaw, Dominic Reyes really doesn't have many weapons besides, the left straight and the left body kick. Like, he doesn't do much besides that. And with Robert Whittaker, he has way more tools in the box than that. So I will be picking Robert Whittaker to win here by a very clear 30-27 unanimous decision. I believe there might come a point where Robert Whittaker, he ends up dropping Nikita Krylov when Krylov crashes in with something like a counter left hook. It's like a step back counter left hook. Or maybe even, wobbles Nikita Krylov with a straight right hand down the middle. I can see that happening. I do not believe that Robert Whittaker is going to have KO power up at light heavyweight by any means, because, Robert Whittaker, he started down at welterweight all the way back in the day. If people forget, man, Robert Whittaker got KO'd by Stephen Thompson. But still, that also means that Robert Whittaker, he's going to be the guy in this fight who's used to that greater level of skill and the much faster pace of the fight that takes place down at the lower weight classes. So yes, Robert Whittaker by decision due to the difference in speed and technique. And next, moving on to the fight that I'm sure every single hardcore fan out there is telling their casual friends, hey, this one is going to be a banger. Let's talk about Bobby Green versus Terrance McKinney. And no, Bobby, even though you are on a 3-fight win streak in Big 2026, I will still not call you by your new legal name, okay? Because it's just cringe. I'm sorry, but it is cringe. Bobby Green versus Terrance McKinney. And really, this fight, of course, as everybody knows, it all comes down to whether Terrance McKinney gets the finish in the first round. As Terrance McKinney himself has admitted in the past, if he doesn't get the finish in the first round, or frankly, in the first half of the first round, he just ends up quitting. Okay, he just kind of falls apart completely. And in this fight, while I do see there being an angle for Bobby Green by round 2 TKO, where he ends up piecing up Terrance McKinney and just KOing him in the second round, by, popping him with the jab, hitting him to the body, stuff like that. I believe that Terrance McKinney is going to beat Bobby Green, and I believe that he is going to do so by round 1 TKO due to ground and pound. And here's the reason why. If you go and watch how Bobby Green fights, it's all about distance management. Bobby Green, he keeps his hands at his waist, right? And he's constantly baiting punches by raising his chin and gesturing to his opponent to hit him, right? And then when his opponent throws out a jab or throws out a right hand, and if the fight is happening in open space, Bobby Green just uses his superior distance management to counter that straight shot. This is how he beat Lance Gibson Jr., and it's also how he beat Daniel Zellhuber. However, Terrance McKinney isn't going to play that game. He's not going to go to the center of the cage and trade jabs with Bobby Green while circling. McKinney is going to immediately pressure, or frankly, he's going to explode forward at Bobby Green while winging some sort of big shot, and he's going to get Bobby Green right up against the fence. And when Bobby Green is up against the fence, that is when he is most vulnerable. That's where Mauricio Rufy knocked him out with a spinning wheel kick. That's where Drew Dober sniped him with the left hand. And as for how I see this fight playing out, I believe that Terrance McKinney is going to basically just bum rush Bobby Green, get him right up to the fence, swing some big shot, and while Bobby Green is busy evading that, or maybe, I don't know, he just ends up getting clipped by that shot and getting knocked out, well, I see Terrance McKinney setting up a takedown, using those big, powerful shots that Bobby Green will know he cannot take. And then, from there, Terrance McKinney, he's going to use every ounce of that explosivity from those fast twitch muscle fibers, and he's going to take Bobby Green down, beat him up badly, and just throw relentless, powerful ground and pound, like serious, actual ground and pound. And he's going to get Bobby Green to turtle up, and Terrance McKinney, he's going to get back mount, and he's going to TKO Bobby Green. Now, of course, Bobby Green might be able to time Terrance McKinney with a shot as McKinney rushes in. And of course, if this fight goes over, the first 3 minutes, Bobby Green probably will win it. But I believe that Terrance McKinney's first round explosivity is just going to be too much for Bobby to handle. And he's just not going to be ready for what Terrance is bringing in the first round. Be it those big winging shots that Terrance McKinney throws with all of his force and all of his power, or that explosive takedown that he's going to shoot after setting it up with those haymakers. So yes, my prediction for this fight is going to be Terrance McKinney by first round TKO due to ground and pound. And now, moving on to another fight up the card, we have Brandon Royval versus Lonnie Kavanagh. And here, I'm picking Lonnie Kavanagh, and my reasoning really just comes down to this. I don't see a method through which Brandon Royval wins this fight. If you go to the striking, yes, it is quite close between Brandon Royval and Lonnie Kavanagh, especially since Brandon Royval is going to have a huge height and reach advantage. And if you go back and watch Lonnie Kavanagh's loss to Charles Johnson, well, he ended up getting knocked out by an opponent who has a very similar frame to Brandon Royval. But the thing with Charles Johnson is, he is one of the few flyweights who has the actual touch of death in his hands. And Lonnie Kavanagh was completely controlling that fight up until he got knocked out. And frankly, I think that happened because Lonnie ended up sort of gassing himself out and dropping his hands, of course, and that's how he ended up getting chinned. But in the Brandon Moreno fight, he seemed much more in control of his cardio over the course of 5 rounds up at altitude. So he showed significant improvements from his KO loss to Charles Johnson there. And then when it comes to Brandon Royval, he's currently on a 2-fight losing streak. He, of course, lost that war to Joshua Van, where he ended up getting knocked down in the final round, and that's probably what cost him the fight. And then he also got round 1 TKO'd by Manel Kape. And in both of those fights, what really stuck out to me was with both Joshua Van and Manel Kape, they just weren't afraid of anything that Brandon Royval was throwing at them. Brandon Royval landed clean on Joshua Van multiple times, and Joshua just ate all of those shots. And then when he was fighting Manel Kape, Manel seemed completely unbothered by Brandon Royval's power. And then when it comes to the grappling, I don't think there's going to be much of it in this fight. But even if it ends up happening, well, Lonnie Kavanagh, he's demonstrated pretty decent takedown defense against Brandon Moreno, and he's also demonstrated some offensive grappling in the past, I believe, with his fight with Felipe dos Santos. And frankly, Brandon Royval, he's such a tall and lanky guy for flyweight. He's very clearly not going to have much muscle on his body to be strong in the grappling, because strength and muscle mass is what you give up for being such a tall and lanky guy for flyweight. So yes, in this fight, I will be picking Lonnie Kavanagh to win by a very clear and comfortable 30-27 decision. And I think that this fight is going to also show Brandon Royval's decline, because he's 33 years old, right? And he's taken quite a bit of damage in his last 2 fights. And of course, this fight is going to further represent the changing of the guard at flyweight. Now, moving on to another fight up the card, we have Cory Sandhagen versus Mario Bautista. And frankly, this is probably the most 50-50 fight on the card. These two, of course, fought way back in the day, and Cory Sandhagen won by armbar. But Mario Bautista has come a very, very far way since that, and he's leveled up quite a bit. However, I believe that there's still going to be a slight gap in the skill level between these two fighters. And yes, that means I will be picking Cory Sandhagen to win, and I believe he will win by a split decision. And here's why. The last time that Mario Bautista fought a striker who was close to Cory's level, or rather, struck with a striker who was close to Cory's level, because Mario Bautista, he fought Umar Nurmagomedov in the past, and Umar just wrestled him that entire fight. The last time Mario Bautista had to strike with a striker who was close to Cory Sandhagen's level, that was against Jose Aldo. And of course, as everybody remembers in that infamous performance, Mario Bautista had to clinch Jose Aldo up against the fence for many minutes in that fight. And that's simply because he couldn't deal with the striking pressure of Aldo. Now, Cory Sandhagen, he doesn't throw with as much volume or as much pressure as Jose Aldo. However, he's still very, very technical on the feet, and I think that Mario Bautista, he's not going to like it there. Mario Bautista is very well-rounded, and so is Sandhagen, of course. But I believe that Cory Sandhagen has a more diverse skill set, and I also think he is more confident in his skill set, if that makes sense. If you go and watch Mario Bautista's fights, you would see that in certain circumstances, he just doesn't look fully ready to pull the trigger, if that makes sense. For example, when he fought Patchy Mix, who, side note, is going to be fighting at Ryzen 54, by the way, so check that out, guys. Even though Mario Bautista was completely piecing Patchy up on the feet, he never went for the KO. He never really sat down on his punches. And as a result, you could arguably give round 3 to Patchy Mix. Like, there's an argument for round 3 Mix in the Bautista fight. And that sort of hesitation kind of leads me to believe that Cory is going to marginally outpoint Mario Bautista, because I don't see either of these guys finishing the other. They're both too defensively responsible to get finished. But I believe that Cory Sandhagen is going to have a marginal edge and confidence, which is going to let him slightly outpoint Mario Bautista. So give me Cory Sandhagen by 29-28 split decision. And now, moving on to another fight where I have no idea what is going to happen, let's talk about Benoit Saint-Denis versus Paddy Pimblett. And well, I will be picking Benoit Saint-Denis by decision. And now, while that might seem like a silly pick because Benoit Saint-Denis has never won by decision before, I do not see Benoit Saint-Denis finishing Paddy Pimblett either by TKO, KO, or submission. However, I also don't see Paddy Pimblett finishing Benoit Saint-Denis by TKO or submission either. And as a result, I'm going to be making this pick solely based upon who is going to be pressing forward in this fight. And that is probably going to be Benoit Saint-Denis, because the one thing that Benoit Saint-Denis does is he goes forward. And even though Benoit Saint-Denis leaves himself open to getting countered when he does go forward, Paddy Pimblett doesn't have the boxing technique to counter Benoit. Paddy Pimblett is not going to be like Dustin Poirier, where when Benoit Saint-Denis is pressing him up to the cage, he's going to throw a left-hand right hook and knock him out, right? Paddy Pimblett doesn't have that sort of boxing skill or punching power. And when these two inevitably get into the pocket, because that is 100% going to happen in this fight, well, Benoit is going to be the one with the power advantage. He's going to be the one who gets right up into Paddy's face and starts winging hooks. And I don't know how Paddy's going to deal with that when that happens. I mean, actually, I know how he's going to deal with that. He's going to end up clinching up. But then, after he ends up clinching, well, Benoit's going to end up working in the clinch. And, well, after they end up separating, it's just going to be the same process over and over again. I expect a large portion of this fight to take place in the clinch or in the pocket. And I think that Benoit Saint-Denis, at certain points, he's going to end up dropping Paddy. But, of course, Paddy, with his jiu-jitsu background and with his chin, he's going to end up surviving off of his back. And even though he'll end up throwing up a submission here and there, Benoit's not going to end up getting caught in it. And it's just going to end up being a lot of guard play from that point onwards. And as for how Paddy Pimblett could get a win and get a finish against Benoit Saint-Denis, I would say he would have to replicate what Renato Moicano did to BSD, where he caught a kick, secured the body lock, and got an early takedown and just landed a tremendous amount of ground and pound and made his eye swell up. And Paddy Pimblett, he is definitely capable of doing something like that because of what he showed in his fight with Michael Chandler, where he ended up getting Chandler down and finishing him with 12-6 elbows. But I don't think that Paddy Pimblett has the offensive wrestling to be able to get Benoit Saint-Denis down. I think Benoit Saint-Denis, he's too physical. And I also think that Renato Moicano has superior offensive wrestling to Paddy Pimblett. And then, of course, with the exception of his fight against Justin Gaethje, which he lost, Paddy Pimblett has faced far inferior competition to Benoit Saint-Denis. I mean, Benoit Saint-Denis, he's fought and beaten Mauricio Rufy, which is really, really good, as we are seeing as Rufy is getting back on track. And while it was sort of a sloppy takedown and ground and pound finish, BSD completely annihilated Dan Hooker. And then, in contrast, Paddy Pimblett, well, he went to the third round against Michael Chandler before finishing him, right? And then, of course, he just got beat up by Justin Gaethje. And frankly, after taking that beating from Gaethje, can we be certain that Paddy Pimblett's chin is going to be the same? Granted, Benoit Saint-Denis, he took a similar beating from both Elisha Zaleski dos Santos and Renato Moicano in the past, but the damage from those brutal beatings doesn't seem to be stopping Benoit Saint-Denis from doing what he does. So we really do need to see how Paddy Pimblett handled that brutal beating from Justin Gaethje and whether it's affected his durability in some way, because I would hazard to guess it somewhat has. So yes, my prediction is Benoit Saint-Denis to win this fight via decision in a brutal, grimy, and pretty sloppy war. And now, moving on to the main event, we have Conor McGregor versus Max Holloway. And well, as I said at the beginning of this video, it all comes down to how washed Conor McGregor is. And my answer to that is, Conor probably isn't going to be all too washed. I think he's going to be well prepared for this fight. I think he's going to be in decent shape. And the fact that this fight is taking place at welterweight is going to help him with his cardio because he's not going to have to cut as much weight. And in fact, it might harm Max a bit because he's built himself up for 155 pounds and not for 170. And as a consequence, he's probably going to be carrying around a little bit extra weight, a little bit more body fat, and that might compromise his cardio and his speed a little bit. But the key word there is a little bit, and I will be picking Max Holloway to win this fight via round 3 TKO. And my answer comes down to this. Conor McGregor, he's 38 years old, and he's coming off a 5-year layoff. On the other hand, Max Holloway, yes, he's certainly on the decline, and he is coming off a loss to Charles Oliveira, but he is still active, he is still fit, and he still knows what it's like to be in the octagon. There just really aren't many fighters who can come back from a 5-year layoff, especially a 5-year layoff where they've been abusing their body with recreational drugs and steroids. And while Conor McGregor was able to outstrike Max Holloway back at featherweight, that version of Conor was completely different from the version that we last saw against Dustin Poirier and are currently seeing in all of the training footage. The Conor that beat Max Holloway all the way back in the day, that was Karate McGregor. That was Conor McGregor at featherweight, where he was at his fastest and where his power was pound for pound at its best, right? Conor at featherweight had the touch of death. But then, as soon as Conor went up to lightweight, well, it took a few punches to TKO Eddie Alvarez. Khabib ate every single shot off of Conor, no problem. And then in the Diaz fights, while Conor was able to drop Nate Diaz, he wasn't able to stop him either. And well, another reason why I believe that Conor McGregor isn't going to win this fight and is going to end up getting TKO'd is that the karate stance Conor that we all saw back at featherweight, that style takes a lot of energy. Throwing those fluid hook kicks and doing that bouncing in and out footwork, you really can't do that for 5 rounds. And that is doubly true when this fight is going to be taking 2 weight classes up from where it originally happened. I believe that the Conor McGregor who is going to show up to this Max Holloway fight is going to be similar to the Conor McGregor that showed up to the second Poirier fight. Boxer Conor instead of karate Conor. Mostly boxing and very few kicks. And the way that I see this fight playing out is this. I think Conor McGregor is going to come out and have a good first round. Because we all know with Conor, his first round is pretty darn good. I think he's going to put good pressure on Max. I think he's going to tag Max with that straight left hand a few times. But the thing is that with Max Holloway, his lateral footwork and his lateral movement nowadays especially, it's improved drastically from when he last fought Conor. And if Max moves laterally here like he does against all of his opponents nowadays, Conor McGregor isn't going to be able to time him perfectly with a left hand to knock him down or knock him out. And in this process of getting Conor McGregor to come to him, I think Max is going to tire Conor McGregor out. And after a first round of throwing big left hands and tracking Max Holloway around the cage, I believe that Conor McGregor is going to show signs of slowing down in the second. And then in the third, I think that Max is going to overwhelm him with volume and TKO him with a flurry of shots. I do not believe that Max is going to chin Conor, but I believe that he will overwhelm him with a series of body shots. I think that the punch that is going to win Max Holloway this fight is going to be his straight right hand to the body, which he loves to throw. It's going to be open for him there since this fight is going to be Southpaw versus Orthodox, and I think Max is going to continuously find that shot to the body, and it's going to wind Conor over the course of 2 to 3 rounds. And that shot is going to tire Conor McGregor out, and is going to lead to Max Holloway finding, I don't know, maybe something upstairs that will buzz Conor a little bit and just lead to the finishing sequence. And even though I would much rather have Conor McGregor win here, not because I like Conor all that much personally, but because I think that having Conor win creates a lot more hype for the sport, and it just grows the sport as a whole, because it'll create like headlines and all that, and maybe get more new fans interested into MMA. But man, I just can't pick him. He's been out of the game for far too long, and he's abused his body far too much, and I don't think his cardio is going to be there. And I think Max Holloway, and effectively, he's going to throw, right straight to the body. I think he's going to circle out, and as a result, I don't see Conor McGregor winning this fight. I've got Max Holloway by round 3 TKO. But anyways, thank you for listening to this video all the way until the end. And as you guys all know, my predictions, especially for these main events, tend to be pretty wrong. Like I got Yuri versus Carlos Ulberg wrong. I got Sham versus Hamzat wrong. And I got Tatsuro Taira versus Joshua Van wrong. And, maybe that will be the perfect curse to get Max Holloway to lose and make the sport a little bit more interesting by getting Conor McGregor a win in the big 2026. Thank you and goodbye.